Thank you so much for joining us today for the Japan Society of Boston member highlights. So the first question that we always like starting off with is how long have you been a member of the Japan Society of Boston and what drew you to JSB?
Well, I think I've only been a member less than a year. And I reached out to JSB originally because I was looking for someone to help with translating correspondence. My husband and I had planned a trip to Japan for research and realized that, we were trying to reach out to officials at a particular temple, and someone there was helping us, but they said we really needed someone to help translate the correspondence back and forth. And so had reached out, somebody suggested JSB for that. And it turned out that Naoko was very willing to do that for us. And it worked out very well. And so as a result of that sort of business transaction, she invited us, and I went with my niece to the gala, which was a wonderful experience. And we got to meet other members. And so I thought, gee, I should join this organization and see what else they have to offer. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of how we got started with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned like Japan and how you were going to Japan. Do you mind elaborating a little bit more on, I guess, just generally what you were doing there with your research, and then hopefully a little bit about like just how your interest was sort of peaked in that area?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'm trying to make it a little bit short. I'm doing research on a book on the impact of climate on traditional building materials. And in my research, I came across an Australian researcher who wrote a couple of papers co-authored by a Japanese researcher about the temples at Nikko. Mm-hmm. And so for the book, I was looking for case studies and wanting to visit the case studies. And so I had this great idea that we should go to Japan and see these temples where they had done a lot of research about how the climate was changing there, and also about how the insects, the beetles, were affecting the wood, and all the different procedures that they were doing in Japan to address this problem. And I was able to get in touch with the Japanese author who was very helpful to sort of introduce me to the people at the temple who did not speak any English. And at that point, she said, you really need somebody to kind of help you with correspondence. Mm-hmm. And that's where JSB was so helpful. And not just translating my letters, but advising me on how to word them so that they were kind of culturally appropriate. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't realize this when I started that process, that Japan was locked down because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And so I started out just trying to correspond to find out what was a good time to visit when they would have time to show me their work. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that I had to get a sponsor in Japan to guarantee me. And so that led to a whole back and forth correspondence.
You needed an invitation.
First, I needed the invitation.
You needed a sponsor, and mm-hmm. you needed to have this trip be productive by, arranging lots of things ahead of time mm-hmm. with the people who we were going to visit there, mm-hmm. right?
Mm-hmm. So Japan did sort of open up right after we left, but at the time we went, it was less restrictive than when we first started our correspondence, but it's still somewhat restrictive. We had to, as they say, have all these special paperwork and visas. Mm-hmm. We had to have a reason to go besides tourism, that they weren't allowing tourists. And then we did not have to quarantine, but we had to have all the COVID paperwork and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then through a different friend, we had found a gentleman in Japan who acted as our translator and guide in Japan. So he also helped with the paperwork and then accompanied us on our travels there. So we, as I said, the purpose of our visit was primarily to go to Nikko to see the temples there and the work that they were doing. And we also went to Kyoto and to Nara and Tokyo, and then ended up in Nikko. And we just had the most wonderful experience, both with our guide and then with JSB's translations. We were able to arrange behind the scene tours where we met with conservators who were actually working on the temple, and we were able to see the work that they were doing to restore lacquer work and to restore the paintings, wood restoration, metal restoration, cedar roofing.
I tell people, when you go to visit all these World Heritage sites, you see so many buildings that are behind scaffolding and scrim, right? And this was a chance to get inside that and to see things where the work is being done and the craft is being practiced and people are being trained in techniques that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. It was it was a very thrilling day. Let me tell you.
Definitely.
And of course, the culture is very different there. And we took a couple of semi-private lessons with Naoko from JSB, my husband and my niece who went with us, the three of us. And languages are not my strength. And I could not remember the simplest phrases. Dan and Margaret did better. But I still found that it was really helpful because taking the lessons, because there are differences in the language structure and how they use language that kind of reflect the Japanese culture, I think.
Completely.
And so even though I didn't really pick up much of the actual language, understanding that that different perspective, I think, was really, really interesting. And that was also true with the translations. I tried a few Google Translates, but what JSB did was very different because, for example, the Japanese language doesn't use a lot of first-person pronouns.
Right.
And so that could really change the meaning if you don't quite know how to do that. But it also reflects a certain attitude towards, not expressing your personal importance, that it's about the other person.
Yeah, even with like I don't know if it was mentioned, but like the honorific form, like specific ways of engaging.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, when you were meeting people for the first time, it was different than how you would talk to them at the end of the day, right? So
yeah.
Well, and even the little ritual of exchanging business cards.
Yeah.
We got a lesson in that from JSP of how to properly present our business cards.
Yes, how to present them, give them, receive them,
And
always pay attention.
and they also gave me help translating my business cards. So I had some business cards printed up that were English on one side and Japanese on the other side. And it wasn't just the language, but which things went where on the card and the whole arrangement of them. So
definitely, yeah.
But it was excellent preparation. It put us into a very anticipatory feeling of getting there, and then when we got there, everything was like, oh, we're ready.
Yes.
Right.
I also, as I mentioned, my niece went to Japan with us, and Margaret and I went to the gala last year. And that was a wonderful experience, not only trying the foods, but talking to different people there, people who were, American, but studying the language. And there were people from Japan who were visiting or had been transplanted. So it was a little taste of the country before we got there. So that was
Right.
very exciting and very helpful. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure when the gala is coming up this year. I hope I didn't miss it. But
No.
Right. Mhm. Well, you mentioned, so you became a member after the gala?
I don't remember
Yeah,
if it
but
was before or
no,
after,
no, it was
but
just after.
I think it was after.
It was
Yes.
just after. It was, Sue had been working with Naoka, and
We'd been going back and forth,
And-
and she actually had an extra ticket that she offered to us,
Hmm.
which was very kind of her. And so
Mhm.
we
But-
took advantage of that, and then I joined. And I haven't taken advantage of a lot of the other offerings, but I'm right now I'm really busy trying to finish the book, but I'm looking forward to getting that finished so that I can take advantage of some of the offerings. There's a program where it's sort of a book club
Yeah.
where they read literature. And
Mhm.
one of the things I wasn't able to do before this trip that I like to do when I travel overseas is read, just kind of a fiction or novels or history about. I was reading a lot of history about Japan, but hadn't really read any of their literature. So I think
Right.
that's really, I think, a really interesting way to get to a sense of a country. And so that's one thing I'd like to do in the
Right.
future with James.
Well, even the technical book that you were reading on the history of the temple was very much from a personal history type of point of view, as opposed to it wasn't technical. It was very much involved with the life of the craftsman who was
That was one book that I read about the history of sort of the evolution of the crafts, the special carpenters that do temple restoration work. So I read a book about that. Actually, I read that on the way back, I think. And then there was another book that I don't remember the name of that was written like in the late 1800s by a British person who had visited Nikko when there was no place to stay, and kind of outlining every temple there and how to get from one place to the next. So that was interesting.
But we had, when we went there, we had an idea of what the temple complex was, but when you actually arrive, it is so much bigger. It's so much more vast and so structured in terms of how you experience it, that it is truly awe-inspiring. And we're there with both looking for technical things, but also with just this huge professional admiration for what we had seen there. And
Dan and I are both architects. I've done more historic preservation work. Dan is more involved in new construction, but certainly has an appreciation for what it takes to put these buildings together.
Yeah.
So.
But it was really interesting when we were in Nikko. We met not just with the people who we were scheduled to see, but with others who were involved in the international crossovers with the ones who were doing the electrical work and the
yes,
because one of the things that they're looking at is trying to control the insects without using pesticides. So they're using heat, and they're doing all this very complicated mock-up study, basically, where you built a small temple and enclosed it and done all this. But there are other studies with the electrical companies to find ways to get the power for this sort of thing, because you know, they really have a great respect for the overall grid and the overall impact of what they're doing in terms of, you know, not just
impact on the
not just
environment.
not on the environment, you know, that we are all living in. So it's I can't tell you how fascinating it was to find this many people who were so involved in what they were doing there. So
Right.
yeah.
Yes, I think one of the things that I read that really resonated was that Japan, for so many centuries, I guess, was very isolated from other countries, and Japan really has, you know, a large population but very limited resources. And when you think about the fact that, you know, their resources are limited, but they have people and labor and, you know, time, it kind of is reflected in the care that they take on everything. You know, whether it's a presentation of your lunch meal or the temples, or, you know, we were there in August, it was very hot, and people had these little cloths that they would carry around, and they were very simple, but they were very, you know, they were beautiful. They had a little design on them. And so, you know, whatever materials they used to create something, they really were thoughtful about how they did that. And that sort of care just kind of permeates everything. It's how they deal with people. You know, the first day we were there, we arrived at our hotel, we went out to find a little bit of dinner, and we found a little cafe kind of place. And when we left, the people ran out after us and were bowing, and we were like, oh, how much tip did you leave? You know? But it was just, we realized that this was they didn't expect a tip, but that they just there was this recognition, you know, acknowledging you in person. It was very,
you know, thank you for this transaction.
Thank you for coming to
you know,
our
this has been, you know, it's been our pleasure to serve you, sort of thing. It was something that we were surprised at the very first, but we came to really appreciate it as we went through, you know.
And it sort of reminded us to slow down and appreciate everything, smell the roses, you know,
Exactly.
to appreciate the people around us that we were interacting with,
and to be nice, you know. It's like, you know, so it's so much easier when everybody is polite, when everybody does, you know, have a certain level of conduct that they think that they're dealing with there, and it's a lesson that we could learn.
Right. For sure. Definitely.
But but there were so many things that were just so, you know, I don't want to say it's surreal, but it was like so very structured, as you know, you would find that you would, you know, you'd be able to go to a temple area, but when you got there, you were definitely, you know, put on a certain path and on a certain experiential level of things, so that, you know, the steps are made to be climbed, and the corridors have little turns, and
it's all about framing your experience and
framing
your
your experience, and you know, knowing when you get to a place that this is a waiting place. And I've you know, one of the things that I found was that, you know, I I made a lot of prints when I was in my,
Mhm.
my younger days, and I saw so many techniques over there that made me want to start it up again, and
Mhm.
think about how this technique, which was done in the course of so many hundred years, can be made into a 21st century technique that I might use, and so I'm finding that I get very inspired by it, by
Right.
the trip. So
Mhm.
it was truly helpful in that matter. Right? So
Definitely. It sounds like a contagious enthusiasm is what I'm sort of feel right now. It sounds kind of, even though I've never really looked into it, I sort of want to research this afterwards because it really sounds like it was resonating. And I'm really glad that JSB could help you with the preparation beforehand and while you were there as well.
mhm.
Oh, it was so valuable. I don't think that we would have been able to arrange the trip
Oh.
without
I
their
think
help.
I think that it was one of those things where we were corresponding back and forth. You were having translations done. You were having conversations in order to determine exactly what the letter should be saying. And one day a letter arrives, and
Right.
it says, it's
Please
there.
come on August 8th.
Yeah, August 5th. August 5th. So.
Mhm. Right.
People say, "Oh, have you never been to Japan? Why would you go in the middle of August? Why would you do it? And the reason we went is because that was the day we were invited. And when we went there, the three people who were the primary, our primary guides for Nico, they spent the entire day with us, 8 hours. We
They had demonstrations of their
demonstrations
traditional crafts and how they were doing repairs and replacing items using the traditional methods. So
but workshops on paint, workshops on lacquer, people looking at the number of people who were involved in the craft of redoing these temples, and you realize that this is like one of 50 or 100 temples that they're
in that one
complex that they're working on, and this such such dedication, and and everyone was so generous with their time and their expertise and such, and they even gave Sue a nail. All right. To take back. We wondered how we would get it past the TSA people here, but it was it was a forged iron.
I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, just there. You get it.
Wow.
But
it's normally you don't use iron with copper. And when Yoshi translated that they were iron nails that they used, I thought, oh, that can't be right. And he said, yes, it's special Japanese.
It's the Japanese steel.
It's how they don't have a lot of iron there. They get the iron from sand, iron sands. And then they make these nails much the same way that they make swords. So it has to do with
how much
the
it's
annealing process.
And so I mean, this is a finely crafted tool, right? And so it was, but it was very, very nice. We looked at them, we talked about them, we learned about them, and then we were presented with one. So it was truly wonderful. Right?
So, we've done a couple of trips to different places to look at case studies, and what we've learned is that no matter how much you talk to people and read and do research, that when you actually visit the place, and more importantly, look at the place with somebody who knows it, you just learn. It just shifts your perspective and your understanding.
It takes all of your preconceptions out of it, right? Because sometimes you go in there and you say, oh, this is what it is. And you get there and you go, no, it's really quite different than that. And
Right.
and that is something that we found not just we found it in the States, we found it in Europe, but we found it truly part of the everyday experience of our couple of weeks there in Japan. It was everything was, learning how deeply these traditions sit within that culture is really a quite an educational thing.
Right. Definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that, as they say, that I can finish this book this summer. It's supposed to be done.
Right.
That we then, because I think one of my regrets about the whole trip and the preparation for the trip is that I really didn't have time. I would have liked to have done more preparation and more language lessons
Mm.
and have more time. We were there for 2 weeks, which was wonderful, but could have spent much more time. So I'm hoping that, knock on wood, that, once we finish that maybe we can get back to JSB and take advantage of some of their language and cultural offerings, and
Right.
then,
Mhm.
Experience the country here. I think it's so wonderful that, a lot of people are never going to be able to travel to Japan,
Mhm.
but this organization gives people an opportunity to experience that culture without going to Japan. So I think that's a real service that we
Mhm.
appreciate.